Good evening. Welcome to Conversations Across Time. Tonight we have a little different setup, and I think you're going to enjoy this episode of Conversations Across Time. Seated to my left, as always, my partner in crime is former Pennsylvania State Representative Babette Joseph. Babby, welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure always. This is great fun.
And it's going to be fun tonight. It's going to be an exciting night, I think. Seated to my right is someone that you've not seen before, and he is the expert when it comes to matters concerning, when we have questions concerning perhaps the mental, would that be correct to say? The
psychological?
Well, the psychiatry or the psychological background of political figures. And that might be overstating it, but I want to introduce to you Dr. Herb Adler. And Dr. Adler is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Jefferson Medical College, also a clinical professor of family medicine at Jefferson Medical College. Dr. Adler, welcome. This is our first time having you on tape, and we are excited because we often have conversations, which I know you are going to admonish us, but we have these conversations and we refer to certain leaders, especially those that we don't disagree with, as a little bit crazy, and you've corrected me and admonished me about using that term. So this is going to be fun because it's going to be an education for Babette, for me, and for the audience. And what I'd like to ask, if we can, is to just jump right in and start talking about trust and betrayal, because those were initially, when I approached you about helping us with Conversations Across Time, that was something a theme that kept coming up.
We keep talking about world leaders, political figures, trying to figure out their motivation for some of the things that they do. Sometimes we conclude that it's got to do with geopolitical ambition that is just always there. But sometimes we want to turn to somebody like you for specific questions.
And of course I said, well, we need to talk to an expert. So we are asking you as an expert, and I already see the look on your face. I know we're going to be challenged. So please.
Well, you're going to be challenged in a positive way.
Okay.
Because when it comes to trust, we are all experts. We are hardwired. All social animals are hardwired to be experts on trust. Even mice. It's been selected for evolutionarily because to be a social animal, you have to be able to trust the other members of your group. For example, a troop of baboons traveling across the savannah. Any one of them can be taken down by a cheetah, a leopard. So they each have to trust that the baboon behind them has their back, literally. Otherwise, the group cannot survive. And so we all have exquisite sensors about whether we can trust somebody, and we don't even figure it out. It's immediate. We have, in the development of the fetus, the central nervous system there's a neural tube that goes from the head to the tail. The top third gets pinched off, becomes central nervous system, your vision, your hearing, and the bottom 2/3 become the gut brain, literally a brain. And that produces 80% of all the neurotransmitters, and that they're the vibes. We have a common sense judgment about whether we can trust this person, whether they're flirting with us or angry or trusting or haughty, whatever. It's immediately there.
And it's not verbal. It's just something that happens organically.
It's immediate.
But often we're wrong, aren't we?
Not very often.
No.
I mean, it's very rare. The gut brain's like a bird dog. It points in the bushes. You know there's something there. You have to use your central nervous system to find out whether it's a wren or a sparrow, but knows it's there. So it's not unfailing, but it's ordinarily very reliable. And it's got to be, because our life depends on it. Trust is the foundation of all human relationships. And and if we can't trust someone, we just can't do business with them.
Or anything.
Or anything. Yes, we just can't do business with them. And social animals cannot survive unless they're in a trusting situation. Let me tell you a bizarre case history that makes the point. Some years ago, a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist and getting his PhD in anthropology was studying small religious cults. And I never met this man, but he gave me an accurate description of him. There was a man, let's call him Ephraim. That's not his name, but he took a biblical name. He was a charismatic leader of a small group of zealots. He was paranoid schizophrenic. He had visions. He heard voices, but he was a charismatic leader. And he had convinced his followers that God had appointed him to be his prophet. And my friend, and his followers bought into it. And my friend asked, well, what makes you think that God chose you to be his prophet? He said, well, God showed me his ass. My friend was as amused as we all are. That why would God choose that method to
God even has one.
delegate you to be his prophet?
Right.
He says it's in the Bible. Okay?
Oh.
Took him to a Bible, opened up to a page where Moses is wandering in the wilderness, sees a burning bush, he approaches it, voice comes out and says, I appoint you to be my prophet to take the children of Israel out of Egypt. And of course he says, who are you? And he says, Jehovah, which in Hebrew means I am who I am. So, mind your own business. And then, and this is the critical passage. In the Bible it says, oh, God turned and walked away. And in his concrete way, Ephraim reasoned that God wasn't wearing any clothes. So he says, you're my prophet, and then he mooned him. And my friend and I were amused because it seemed so absurd. But that tantalized me for a couple of days because I knew I was missing something, because all the people who believed in him were buying refrigerators and renting houses and selling cars. They were not crazy. But they picked up something genuine about Ephraim. And that haunted me for a couple of days. And later that week, I was treating an attorney, and he said to me, going through divorce, he says, you know, you got to cover your ass. And suddenly the light bulb went on. Okay. That is what Emmanuel grasped, that that's what God, that was meant that I trust you, I can be vulnerable with you.
So by God showing him his ass meant that God is vulnerable to him?
Exactly.
Yes, and trusted him.
Yes, yes, because trust.
Yes.
You make yourself vulnerable.
Exactly. Means you can be vulnerable with somebody. And without fear.
Which is why betrayal is so hard for people, because they've made themselves vulnerable, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the heart of any relationship. Intimacy is not two pelvises touching. Intimacy means that you can be vulnerable with someone and trust that they're not going to use that against you. And that's what Ephraim grasped, that in his concrete way that we were missing, and that so it's
interesting.
trust is it is the before there was. I mean, the golden rule is treat people the way you want to treat you. Well, that's religion didn't make that up.
It's cross-cultural.
Men didn't make it up. Humans didn't make it up. Mice could have made it up.
Certainly dogs, lions.
Exactly.
Yes.
No group can survive unless they treat each other reciprocally.
Even fish school, to protect themselves.
Exactly.
Even fish.
Yes, and we're constantly monitoring other social animals for that. If you can train mice to do various tasks by they push a lever and they get food. You can train them just as well by pushing a lever and seeing other mice.
Really?
Because we are constantly alert to trust or betrayal. It's vital.
And that's a common theme that runs through.
Well, right. I mean,
history.
how do
Throughout
we apply what you've been saying, for instance, to world leaders?
Yes.
The kind of people that we have on our show and that we have conversations with, they wouldn't be world leaders if great numbers of people didn't trust them.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, I feel so many world leaders have betrayed the trust that is placed in them, and what is that all about? I mean,
Well, it's about arrogance. I mean, it's because one of the there weren't many things that Mitt Romney said that I found memorable, but one of them was when he quoted his father, who had been president of Chrysler, I think. He said his father began a commencement exercise by saying, there are very few things that are more vulnerable than entrenched success. And it's true that the framers of the American Constitution were brilliant because they were not ideologues. They recognized that everybody's going to grab as much power as they can. And the way to ensure justice are by checks and balances. For example, the communists were very idealistic. They thought, you're a good communist, you're going to do the right thing, and we know what happened.
Yes.
They just grabbed as much power as they could, but power does corrupt.
and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
I believe that. I see it all the time.
So yes, you're right. To become a world leader, charismatic, Manson was charismatic.
Right.
What he did with it. Being charismatic is a particular interpersonal skill. It's like what Bernie Madoff had. He knew. I mean,
He, for the audience, he is the person that sold this pyramid scheme to how many of his friends, and they all went down with him, and it was ghastly.
Yeah, people are starting to think that Ponzi's last name was Scheme.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because it was the Ponzi scheme.
Right.
And what these people are Beethovens, they're Einsteins in knowing what buttons to push to create
People
trust
like Madoff.
upon men.
Yeah.
But here's a question I have. When we talk about the Bernie Madoffs of the world and how they actually take advantage, they con people.
Oh, yes.
But the fact that Bernie Madoff did this with so many of his friends, people that he would know he had to see. For instance, you can have a certain amount of guile with someone that doesn't function in your social orbit. That we understand. But Bernie Madoff particularly, he targeted his friends. Well, of course, who else? It's like
Who else did he know to sell his stuff
it's
to?
like Willie Sutton. Why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. So
Right.
essentially,
Well, he was a sociopath.
Okay.
I mean,
Who he? Willie Sutton or?
well, I don't know about something, but I know, but Bernie Madoff was.
Okay.
And here's the point. We think of empathy as good, and it's only good if it's combined with compassion. There are people like Bernie Madoff, like con men, who have superb empathy. They don't have compassion or sympathy, and they use that to know what buttons to push with various people to get them to trust them.
Well, everybody who's in politics does that. No, everybody who's a leader does that to some extent. That's
Well,
how you get to be a leader.
you get to be a leader, yes, because you have a very high interpersonal intelligence, which can be used for good or ill. And if
And
there
how do
are
you
no
know the
checks
difference?
and balances, then you can go, and I will use this word correctly, you can go crazy in that you can become deranged, and Hitler and various other people, and
Stalin.
drive into the ditch because you don't have a loyal opposition who says you shouldn't do this.
But
They're
you,
terrified of you.
right, and you've done that in order to amass the power that you, so you've threatened, or there's threat there always.
There's fear, and
Yes.
and the problem that I have always said to folks, you need to have people around you who are comfortable to disagree with you.
Yes. And that's the point the doctor is making
Exactly.
about our Constitution,
The
which
checks
is
and
kind of
balances.
interesting because we've now checked and balanced ourselves into absolute
Into
paralysis
Exactly.
in this year,
Yes.
these years,
Yeah.
or at least the legislative branch is completely paralyzed. I wouldn't say the judiciary or the executive is.
Well, it's a problem of dosage for everything. There's too much, too little, and just right. And one of the things that led to the downfall of the Soviet Union and Putin is heading in that direction is that Stalin shot all the messengers so that there was no loyal opposition who could warn him that this was coming, and so suddenly it collapsed. And the same thing is happening with Putin. We cooperation means being able to.
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm thinking of more extreme leaders, like the folks in Saudi Arabia.
I was thinking the
Yeah.
same thing about the
Yeah.
cleric when they
The-
beheaded a cleric.
And the way they
46 hours.
treat their own citizens if they happen to be women, and on and on. And much of this is around the world. I mean, we got dictators and tyrants in lots of places. And there's plenty of people in the United States right now that say Obama's a dictator. He's a tyrant. He's black. I mean, people tell me that all the time. I laugh.
Well, they say it, but they say it because they mean it as accusation. That's not
It's not a
clearly not a
description.
considered opinion.
And it's
But-
not a description of
But there's an expression in Yiddish. It sounds better in Yiddish than in English, but I can't repeat it in Yiddish. But it's that people shouldn't get adapted to what they're capable of becoming adapted to. You could become adapted to being a concentration camp guard. You can be adapted, and we're going to Saudi Arabia, you can be adapted to helplessness. Look at, with North Korea, you can be adapted to think that it's perfectly okay for women to be treated this way, or for there to be a fearless leader, or
for
to
the
be
population
cruel
to be
animals, for example.
population to be starving so that you can buy military equipment, or talking about North Korea.
yes.
Exactly. and that we catch behavior and ideas from each other, and then can come to dominate us. And we can have all kinds of strange beliefs. For example, if I ask you, how would you feel about your daughter being thrown from the lip of a volcano into the inferno?
Probably
you
not
would-
too positive.
For sure, okay? But if you grow up in a culture in South America where that is considered the highest honor that could be bestowed on a family, because that's the way the gods are going to be appreciated, and it's going to bring great prosperity to the group, of course, it's wonderful.
Isn't that the same thing that we hear when we have these suicide bombers who believe this is martyrdom? They are actually going on to paradise, and they will be experienced in the other world. They will be treated as royalty. I mean, there's that common thread, and it's just, as you said, it's cross-cultural. It happens in other societies, and it has been going on for years.
Well, it's to be a social animal, you have to be wired for a transcendent interest. That is, to be a social animal, you have to be wired to think that there's something greater than yourself.
Yes.
God, the platoon,
The group,
the
right?
state,
Yeah.
the group, okay? And I mean, when a wasp stings an intruder and loses its life, it doesn't give it a second thought, because to be the hive is
It's protected.
transcendent.
Yes.
So if you believe that you're acting for the survival of your platoon, your country, your religion, it's a no-brainer.
So is that a segue into the way countries, nations work,
Of course.
where people do things that are incomprehensible outside of this nation,
Yeah.
but they feel that it's saving whatever country it is and
Yeah,
all the people in it and their traditions, their religion, whatever else.
Isn't that nationalism? I mean, isn't that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
component?
it's nationalism,
Yeah.
it's religion, it's being a social animal. There's
Which
something
is-
more important than my
Yes.
life,
Yes.
my family, my
Except that
army,
these
whatever.
tyrants are always protecting themselves.
Well-
I mean, they're making themselves rich. They're surrounding themselves with military, bodyguards.
But one of the things, just as you said, they're so charismatic and able to bring people in.
Yes,
You know, I mean,
to make people, charisma, make people love them.
yes.
Okay, once you do that, then, you know, Romeo and Juliet, you'll do anything.
And we did a show a while back because we were looking at, well, actually the person that we had on was a good German. And if you recall, because I'd always had this question in my mind of when Hitler rose to power, there were so many intelligent people in Nazi Germany, and how did they let this man come
Well,
to power and do?
That what happened in Germany was a shock to so many people because they were producing literature and music and culture, and they were, you know, at the forefront of the Western world in many, many ways. And then suddenly, at least to many people, it appeared suddenly.
Well, it's a good example that intelligence can be very separate from humanism.
Huh.
I mean,
Yes.
and once you, I saw somebody came back from a concentration camp and how could you treat humans this way? And the answer is very simple. You can't treat humans this way, but you can treat cockroaches this way, right?
Right.
So once you convince your group that the out group are cockroaches, Doesn't
Humility.
hurt your conscience
Okay.
to step on them.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
It's your job to step on them.
Exactly.
You
That-
get praised for stepping on them.
But
Yeah.
but isn't that also what we see with the inclination to define our current president as something other than,
Yes, yes.
right?
Yes.
He's
And this country, it seems like the biggest divide that I see, well, there's many, but let's say the biggest divide is between races.
Yes.
And having to do with people who have African background and people who have Western or European background.
Here's the challenge.
Although there's plenty of people who are Asian as well now.
We are hardwired to be tribal. I think that's the primal fall. We can't change that. What we can change and should change is the code of conduct we extend toward the other tribe, okay? Yes, there will always be subdivisions, and we have to work around that. We can't deny it. We can't deny prejudice because that impairs our ability to deal with it. But what is learned is how you treat the other. Do you tolerate them? Do you respect them? Do you ethnically cleanse them, which is the old-fashioned way? And
Right.
in fact, it's a little.
not so old-fashioned.
Well, you're both lawyers. I chuckle when I hear about judges saying they want the Ten Commandments in their courtroom because that will teach morality. For starters, Ten Commandments sanctions slavery and stoning your neighbor if Moses going on a Saturday. But beyond that, in the Old Testament, when the Israelites came to the land of Canaan, had to be occupied by Midianites. They were already there, and Moses told Joshua, just go in and kill all the men and all the women who have slept with men, save only the sheep and the cattle and the virgins. No apologies. I mean, that was ethnic cleansing in the
Yes, it
Bible.
was.
That's the way business is done. And, so we're trying to grow out of that.
But I always think that one of the most important things that, however you want to call the ancient Jews, Israelis or Israelites, Hebrews, whatever you would call them, had this concept that there is one creator. And that means that we are all brothers and sisters, which is a big step from every tribe having its own set of gods. And the gods fought each other as well as the humans.
Well, let me comment. First of all, the Hebrews were, of all people, very, very moral. They freed their slaves. The inscription on the Liberty Bell is, "Let freedom ring and declare liberty throughout the world." That's from the Bible. And Jubilee, the 49th year,
Right.
they freed all their slaves. However, bringing monotheism to the world was a curse, because when we all accepted polytheism, there's Jupiter, Zeus.
Right.
I haven't heard of your God, but join the group.
Yes.
But if there's only one God, then and you say he's Allah, and I say he's Jehovah, and someone else says he's
Christ.
Christ. Now we got a problem, don't we? Because
Yes.
we
Maybe
can't be right. I got to get rid of you and your God. I can't join the group.
that's interesting because I always thought
was
the
a
other way.
monopoly.
I always
Monotheism
thought the other way.
is a monopoly.
It is.
And so
And it's
my
a
God, this
rivalry.
is my God, and that's that.
But it makes us all children of God, so we are all brothers and sisters, so we ought to behave better towards each other.
But we got a different God.
Your God is different from
Yeah.
my God. See, that's the problem.
There's
But
the rub.
before monotheism, then your God was really different from my God.
Well, that's all right, but with polytheism, just
And they fought too.
oh my God, did
The gods fought too. They fought among themselves. They fought foreign gods. I mean,
yeah.
all those stories.
The African schoolyard bullies did.
Yes,
that,
yes.
and they're the people we made.
Yeah.
Well,
That's an interesting thought.
I want to thank you so much because this has been very informative just in terms of giving us a backdrop and a way to look at these various historical personalities. It explains at least, or illuminates at least, something that's a common thread that we see with a lot of the people that we've and
That we have conversations with who are
exactly.
playing world figures of various
Of course,
kinds,
of
and they're in character. So,
and we can see the commonality, that thing about them being charismatic, which would explain so much. Really does, because of course everyone wants to follow someone who has charisma.
well,
It's
and
sort of
that's
like
part of you're looking for people to
Yes.
trust.
Yes, you're looking for people to trust, and here
And somebody sticks up above the common wave, and
yes,
people,
Yeah.
it's like, I always think of a stream with an obstruction in it. People or things catch up in back of the obstruction while the water goes by, and pretty soon it's all behind the obstruction, right? And now you're a leader.
Now, and may I ask this, Dr. Adler, may we call upon you again?
Of course.
Oh,
Of
great.
course.
This has been fun.
This
has
is
been-
very interesting that you think monotheism is a curse, when I always thought of it as a blessing. But I'll recalibrate. I'll see if I agree with you or not.
Okay.
Well, this has been as I said, a different format, and I was thinking that the audience was going to enjoy it as much as we have enjoyed it. This is something that has been, as I said before when we first started, a common theme that runs through so many of our programs: trust and betrayal. And to have the explanation, and I might add, it's an explanation that I can follow, I think our audience can follow, and it gives us food for thought. So
Definitely.
thank you again, Dr. Adler, and it's been our extreme pleasure to
Pleasure's
have you
all
here.
mine.
Great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and this has been Conversations Across Time with our special guest, Dr. Herb Adler, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. Babette?
I enjoyed it.
So good night, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
What do you think?
What do you think? I think it was good.
I do too. I enjoyed it.
Very good.